Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute's 2025 Capitol Hill Region Series. I'm Caroline Gonzalez-Scott, Senior Vice President of Programs and Alumni Affairs. To start this discussion, please join me in welcoming Congressman Robert Garcia, representing California's 42nd Congressional District. Welcome, Congressman.
Hey everyone, ¿cómo estamos? ¿Todos bien? ¿Cómo estamos? First of all, it's great to be here with all of you. Obviously, CHCI broadly, I just wanted to first say it's an incredible program, and so I'm very grateful to have had not just incredible people from this program now in my office, but also to meet so many people across the Capitol. So I'm very grateful. Especially today, I'd love to be able to support fellows that we have and folks that learn so much from CHCI. I actually, when I go back home oftentimes, I run into folks that were part of the CHCI program that are now at all different levels of government, which is really great. Can you also grab, are these my notes here? I also just want to, I know that we're discussing today a lot of issues from the intersection between climate and environmental justice and making sure the impacts on workforce. So I think it's really exciting for the panel. I want to just note, I think most of you probably know I'm from Long Beach, the LA County area, and I also represent communities just north of Long Beach in Southeast Los Angeles. In fact, Raul, who was in CHCI last year, I guess a year and a half ago, last year, and was one of our interns for CHCI. We hired him right after he finished his program, and he's from Bell, right, Raul? Bell Gardens, close. And so Raul's been great, and we always try to hire and uplift folks that we're able to as well. Long Beach and LA County are greatly impacted by the cost of utilities, by impacts of climate, by rising housing costs, which all of course have an important intersection. But we're also working to change that and working, especially talking to people on the ground. The great thing about I think what's happening in Long Beach and Greater Los Angeles is you have new, young Latino activists and leaders and community organizers that are really changing the status quo and getting involved in all of these debates and conversations, which is really important. I'm really grateful to Alyssa from our team. Alyssa is not just organized a great panel and discussion today, but is an amazing part of our legislative team in our office. We have a great legislative team. I think our legislative director is here, Andrew, somewhere. Oh, there he is. And he knows very well how hard she works, and she deals with all of my stupid jokes and all the funny things that we try to do, and also all the very serious things that we try to do in Congress as well. Let me last just say broadly, not about this panel, but broadly, that it's really important for us as folks that believe in advancing Latinas and Latinos in government, that we always think about how we support our communities back home and never forget where we come from. And I'm an immigrant. I didn't become a U.S. citizen until I was 23. And I know how difficult it is to be undocumented. I know how difficult it is to be a temporary resident, not have security in this country. And we should never forget all the struggle of our family, our parents, our tias, our abuelitas, everyone that worked really hard so that we could be here in this space, doing all these amazing panels and contributing to our country's future. And so, I'm very proud of you, by the way. You're doing an amazing job, and hopefully you guys have a great panel. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Garcia, for your opening remarks and for your commitment to ensuring that we are moving toward cleaner and modernized infrastructure. Boss doesn't like to brag, but he's done a lot of work in this space, and so I really appreciate that. It has been an honor working in your office these past couple of months, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's second session of the CHCI Capitol Hill Policy Briefing Series. My name is Alyssa Martinez, and I am the CHCI Clean Energy Postgraduate Fellow. I'm proud to be moderating today's panel, Bridging the Gap, Clean Energy Access for Latinx Communities. We're living through a moment in which climate change is now a present reality. It is no longer a future threat. We see extreme heat, wildfires, hurricanes, flooding, rising utility bills, disproportionately hitting our communities. And we're asking, will our neighborhoods survive the next disaster? And as demand for energy increases, will our families be able to afford it? The clean energy transition is not just about fighting climate change, it's about opportunity. It's about creating jobs, lowering energy bills, and opening new pathways to success for Latina families. It's about strengthening energy security so that our communities aren't the first to lose power during disasters. It's about economic development, revitalizing communities through cooperatives, training programs, and federal investments. And it's about the externalities of this transition, the cleaner air, lower healthcare costs, and healthier neighborhoods that come with phasing out fossil fuels with diverse community-owned energy sources. Right now, Latina households face a 24% higher energy burden than white households. More of our incomes are going to utility bills. We live in older, less efficient homes, and we're more likely to rent and more likely to be shut out of rebates, incentives, and federal programs that could lower our bills. At the same time, Latinas are 31% of new energy workers. We are those in the clean energy economy, yet we're too often excluded from the decision-making and the long-term benefits. As the new administration attempts to roll back funding and weaken our standards, it's up to us to hold the line. To say that we don't want to just participate in this transition, we want to lead it. We want the communities we come from to thrive. We want the communities we represent here in Congress to thrive. And we want to make sure that every dollar of federal investment creates opportunity where it's needed most. And today, we're going to explore what it takes to do just that. We'll hear about expanding access to clean energy for disinvested communities, local economic resilience and scaling community-owned projects, workforce development and job creation, and finally, safeguarding clean energy investments in the space of shifting policies. I'm honored to be joined by 4 incredible panelists who have been doing the work from policy to finance to advocacy to implementation, and they'll help us think about how to build a clean energy future for and with the Latina communities. After our speakers give their introductions, I'll guide them through a moderated discussion and then open the floor to the audience for some questions. Alrighty, so let's get started. I'm thrilled to introduce our first panelist who brings deep experience at the intersection of energy policy and workforce development, Zach Valdez. Zach Valdez is a former strategic advisor in the U.S. Department of Energy under the Biden administration. And thank you, Zach, so much for speaking with us today.
So you just want me to kind of give an introduction?
Yeah.
So I'm originally from Texas. I'm a Texan. I came here about 8 years ago after I finished up a PhD at Baylor University because there was an increasingly public distrust in science. I think we're still seeing it here today. And so I was like, oh, I'm smart. I know what I'm doing. I'm just going to go to Congress. I'm going to figure this out. Well, I was so humbled when I came and I worked in the Senate because I realized that it's not just facts that matter, right? You have to put a communication and a strategy together to find ways to leverage those facts. And so not just knowing the information is important, it's how you get other people to realize it and to absorb it. And so I went from the Senate to nonprofits to support things like the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers and Thriving Earth Exchange at the American Geophysical Union, focused on community-based science. And then I went back into the executive branch to look at the Department of Commerce, working on advanced manufacturing and how do we develop and design and create the things in this country that we used to do 30, 40 years ago to rebuild economies. And then about 3 years ago, my first day as an appointee was actually with Chris Castro, who I'm really excited to share this panel with. And our whole goal was how do we support clean energy advancement and transitions here and do it in a way that provides equity and inclusion. And so I'm really excited to talk about how we've done that, ways that we've thought about it, and then really listen and learn from you about where do we innovate and where do we misstep or where can we go back and continue doing this great work. So thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zach. I'm excited to dig a little bit deeper into your work in a bit. I'd now like to introduce our next panelist, who is doing great work to build capacity in frontline communities so they can access the clean energy funding and resources that they need. Sada Z. Salem is the Director of Community Engagement for We Act for Environmental Justice. Thank you, Sada, for being here.
I'm gonna make sure I do this right. Can you guys hear me? Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Alyssa Sada. I will start off by saying while I'm not Latina, I've worked a lot in Latin American communities and communities throughout California, New York, and New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the CBI. And I always take my role as an amplifier. So how I ended up in this space was my country of origin is Egypt. I'm first generation, and when I went into my master's program at UCSB for environmental science and management, I was one of 3 people in our program who was a person of color who grew up in this country, all of us first generation. And what that indicated to me is that there's a big gap in who is making decisions versus who is being impacted by those decisions. So while I went to grad school to save some fish, I actually took a hard left into environmental justice work and started to create an environmental justice course there that is now still running, and joined Grid Alternatives, where I worked on energy programs for 5 years that serve majority Latina communities throughout the Central Valley, Salinas, Northern California, Southern California. And one thing I will say that I'm really excited to talk about is the importance of nuance, that Latin American communities or the Latino communities are not a monolith, and that what is relevant and useful for communities in Jersey, for example, is different from what is relevant and important for folks in the Central Valley or even on border states. And so I think it's really important as an implementer that we recognize that the nuance is important. While equity is important, it is the thing that always gets engineered out, and in that you use the nuance of how to support communities at the level that they are at versus the policies we put forward that are very much about big sweeping changes and don't take into account the importance of their exact needs. So really excited to speak with all of you and pass that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sada. I'm excited to hear more about the work you're doing with the Act. Next, I'm thrilled to introduce someone who's catalyzed clean energy projects through climate financing and through federal agency work. Chris Castro is Executive Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Climate First Bank. I'm very excited to have you, Chris.
Thank you, Alyssa. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Again, my name is Chris Castro. Proud second-generation Cuban American. I'm from Miami, Florida, and Orlando, Florida, respectively. And over the last 18 years have been steeped in this movement of climate and sustainability in different ways. I started as a campus and community organizer at the University of Central Florida. I started a couple of nonprofits and a small business, so some entrepreneurship throughout that journey, still operating today. And the last decade really have been steeped in government, trying to pull the levers of government, both at the local level in the city of Orlando as the Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer, and then at the federal level at the U.S. Department of Energy, both in which we were trying to advance policies, programs, and partnerships that were trying to unlock clean energy access and to decarbonize our homes and our buildings, our transportation, and our energy sectors. As Zach was mentioning, over the last 3 years, we were at DOE, and it was incredibly exciting because the Department of Energy is going through an evolution. It received a significant amount of new funding that ultimately evolved its mission into the demonstration and deployment of clean energy technologies, in addition to the research and development, which has been kind of foundation. And what that did was allowed us to actually create new functions, things like the Office of State and Community Energy Programs, where I served as the Chief of Staff, that really focused on how do we provide funding and technical assistance to subnational players and community institutions, nonprofits, school districts, universities, to also be a leader and a game changer in the transition to clean energy. And so now, as of earlier this year, I've transitioned into the private sector. And I've joined Climate First Bank. It's the nation's first FDIC-insured green bank depository, an actual place where we hold our money in addition to using that money for good. And that's really a big differentiator for this bank. We're a bank as a force for good, using collective deposits to fund things like affordable housing, to fund things like workforce development and clean energy and small businesses. And I think one of the big differentiators, which I'll talk about in a bit, is how we're trying to partner with other institutions to make clean energy more accessible and more affordable, especially for LIDAC communities, for our Hispanic communities, for our communities of color, and beyond. And so looking forward to diving into that further. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris. Rounding out our panel is someone who has been a fierce advocate for equity in the U.S. territories and who has helped shape federal policy to meet the needs of historically underserved communities. Gretchen Sierra Zolita is the first ever White House Director for Puerto Rico and the U.S. territories and former senior advisor under the Biden administration. Thank you so much, Gretchen, for joining this discussion.
Thank you for having me here. So as she said, I'm Gretchen. I am from Puerto Rico, born and raised. I would like to start where you are now. I left Puerto Rico because I wanted to do government work that was non-politicized. So for a long, long time, that's what I did. And it was my purpose at the time to become very well educated in the ways of government. So I worked at GAO, I worked at OMB, I worked on the Hill. And then when that seemed to cover all the domestic, I moved over to USAID, which unfortunately is being disbanded. And so I had a great opportunity to learn. I'm telling you that because I know you're starting careers to learn how about government works. Then there was a small, deviation. I had children and so forth. And then I embarked into that stage in a kind of a stage of advocacy and so forth. Around the time that Puerto Rico started having problems with advocacy in the Latino space, actually it was working with the foundation. Around the time that Puerto Rico had started having fiscal problems and so forth, I kind of re-engaged in Puerto Rico and started on a whole, diaspora organizing, media, just everything having to do with the, grassroots engagement and organization and communications with the Puerto Rican diaspora in support of what was going on in Puerto Rico. After that, or concurrent to that, I started to develop an interest in the other territories. And after, I would say, 11 years of doing these kind of things, I said, I don't know what else to do because there are no jobs for people who do territories. And the Biden administration decided to create this position. And you say, well, why is this position important? Well, because territories are legally and politically different entities, one, and because they don't have, they're disenfranchised. So they don't have senators, they don't have a congressional delegation to go to advocate effectively for them. So they're very overlooked and most often invisible. And when policies and programs are designed and implemented, oftentimes it's like trying to pick up, a square peg into a hole. They just don't fit. So while there was just one of me in the administration, it was a start. And, it was kind of like a clue or a tip of what we needed to do in the future, which is to have many more of me throughout the federal government, the same way we have done with tribal affairs. And they're not there yet, but they're making great progress. And it's a very, very similar situation, the sovereign nations versus the sovereign territories of sorts. They're not sovereign, but they're, as I like to say, foreign in a domestic sense. So that's the importance of the position. What I hope to tell you later on today is that Puerto Rico has embarked on this path of renewable energy and inclusion of communities. And so I would like to show you what we did and what were the good parts about it, and what are the challenges and what lies ahead. And hopefully you can learn from that model of participatory policymaking.
Thank you, Gretchen, and excited to hear more about the lessons we can learn from Puerto Rico. You've all led and continue to lead very important work in making sure that clean energy access remains inclusive for all, especially for historically disinvested communities. And I'd now like to follow up with some insights our panel shared and dive a bit deeper into their work. I'm actually going to move over to the table.
Okay. A little cozier combo, right?
So my first question is for Zach. Zach, you've led large-scale investment strategies. You worked on supplier diversity and workforce forecasting. How can federal investments be better targeted to support job creation and workforce pipelines, specifically when Latina communities and Spanish communities as a whole?
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's really important to identify, oftentimes Latino and Latina communities are considered in a deficit model. And does everybody understand what a deficit model is here? Right, where it's like, we don't have the skills, we don't have the capabilities, we just need access and information, and that's all that it'll take. But there are systemic barriers to how and why maybe some of the communities that we grew up in are underrepresented or underfunded or under-resourced. And so as we think about workforce, that is the key to it. I would say underlying workforce is education. So there's a policy there that how do we develop better educational tools so that people can get into the workforce careers that they want. But I mean, you could you can find facts all over the news where it shows that clean energy jobs are booming, right? The last administration, they were growing larger than many other across the sector. I think 2x of what everything else was. So how do we get the Hispanic community involved in that? And then I'll be honest, even at DOE, how do we get our Hispanic communities not just doing the contract or the labor or the low-level jobs, but how do we get them into the SVPs like my buddy over here, Chris, right? So one of those things is like, what are the tools and how do we build that out? So the federal funding builds innovation, it creates resources so that these communities can then thrive. And I think one of the biggest things is like supplier diversity. So if I was to think about 3 different policies that could help with supplier diversity, so that as we're building new solar plants or wind farms or battery plants, what are the ways that we can get Hispanic communities involved? One would be set-asides, right? So how do we find ways that support supplier diversity, specifically for supplier diversity? There's like 8A and 504 loans from the SBA that are focused on specific groups of people so that they have access to it. So let's make sure first that they have those. The other one, and Seta will talk about this, is technical assistance, right? I can't tell you how many times at DOE, we have people coming in and they have no idea how to fill out a proposal. You can have the best idea in the world, but if you can't get funding because you don't know what the forms are and how to be effective at writing a government grant, then you're not going to get the money. And that's a huge hurdle for a lot of people. Not to mention, like, when I think back at the small businesses where I grew up, they don't even know that these funds exist, right? So how do we get out there? And a lot of this is you going back to the communities that you grew up in and saying, here's access. I'm your key to federal government funding. And I would say the last one is using data. Maybe I'm a scientist, so like I'm obviously a little biased to getting as much information as possible to people, but find out what the data is. And if you don't have it, Congressional Research Service will get it for you, right? A lot of y'all work in Congress, use them. They are great at their job. And if they can't get the answer, then they will go and find the answer or find ways to get the answer. And if we don't have the access to that data, then tell your boss, like, hey, we can't find out this data. Why don't we ask Census or put a new bill in that says, like, we want to track this data now, right? And then they always want to get their name on a bill. That's an easy bill to do. The next one is workforce pipelines. So how do we were doing a lot of this at DOE, but public-private partnerships. The private industry generally is adverse to risk, and they're very cautious about their investments. So what the public sector needs to do is support them in their investments as they think about what the pipeline looks like, whether that be at K-12 education or things like how do we do more apprenticeships, and how do you get your boss to say, hey, we want more apprenticeships in New Mexico or Texas or Florida. Like, you should fund this so that we can co-create apprenticeships with industry, right? So we'll put in 50%, you put in 50%, and as soon as students come out of high school or community college, they already have a job that they're working to, they're making a little bit of money. And then I would say, one of the things that Sarah mentioned that I think is really important is place-based solutions. Like, growing up in Texas, like, and then coming to DC, we at the federal level get stuck inside the beltway. And like, we don't realize that the solutions, like, we create policy for the entire country. This is great, this is amazing, but things that work in Florida are not gonna work in Maine, right? And so like, that's on you to make sure that when we implement these types of projects, that they are working for them. We're not gonna, we're more than likely not gonna build solar plants in Oregon because they just don't get enough sun in certain spaces. But what resources do we have? And let's make sure that the Hispanic community that's in those places has access and ability and can use their ingenuity and their hardworking capabilities to really drive that change. So I'll say, these technologies and these investments are not only here to drive innovation, but it's on, like, I always look to the younger generation because y'all are the ones that are going to make the change in the world, and you're the one that's going to transform lives for the future. So I don't mean to like put a bunch of weight on your shoulders, but I really count on y'all because y'all are the ones that are like standing up and you're more vocal and you have access to social media that can get you views to hundreds of thousands of people, right? So use it wisely. but really think about how you can use it to increase inclusivity and increase equity, and to promote the types of things that are going to support clean energy and build the workforce and the clean energy future that we need. Thank you.
So that's really quickly, if I can just add on, when I was at DOE, I was shocked at how much money the state energy offices were receiving from DOE and other agencies to advance a lot of this work. And so as you're going back to your communities, you're thinking about where funding could be to support community workforce development. Make sure to not leave the state energy office untouched, right? They have everything from a program that's supposed to focus on training minority contractors. It's called Training Residential Energy Contractors, or TREC is the name of the grant. And all state energy offices receive the formula grant, and some apply for even more money on top of that, competitive grant, to basically get into their communities and support contractors with training to install these new clean air technologies, which take a skill set and a level of technical understanding on how to do that, right? Heat pump water heaters, you might have heard of this technology, right? Plumbers normally don't handle refrigerants. Guess what heat pump water heaters have? Refrigerants in them. It's basically almost a reverse air conditioning system. So now we have to make sure that we're training plumbers to properly install these technologies and don't create this unintended consequence, right? And so think about state energy offices. There's a tremendous amount of money, both annually and recent grants that are obligated and will start to trickle out into communities over the next couple of years.
Thank you for both chiming in on that. I now want to turn to Sara. Sara, you work closely with communities navigating the federal grant process, as Zach touched on. What structural changes are needed to ensure that Latina organizations and communities can actually access and benefit from clean energy funding?
The list is long. Well, it's long in the terms of what's happening in our current administration. So one thing we've heard prior to the shift in administration, even under the Biden administration, was this stuff is scary. We really, really don't want to interact with the federal government for a number of reasons. It could be the cumbersome of understanding what a UEI number is and being in SAM.gov and navigating these complex systems. It could be the IRS fear of what if we get audited, do we have the right tracking systems in order to deal with the administrative burden of having federal grants. And that's really why the TICTACs were created, the Thriving Community Technical Assistance Center. And I will give a brief overview just to make sure we're all grounded on what the TICTACs are. So the TICTACs were awarded in 2023. They are centers across the United States that are meant to provide that technical support to allow folks to engage with this monumental funding that is coming from the IRA and the bilateral infrastructure law. Because often from whether I was working at Grid Alternatives or WEAC, what we'll hear is the money can come, but we can't really do anything with it if we don't have the skills to deal with it. And so these technical systems were meant to bridge that opportunity, to provide folks with the capacity to deal with the administrative burden, be able to navigate the complex governmental systems, and actually learn what is possible. Because often what you see is that if people understand the system, they can engage with it. But those systems are opaque, and they're not made to be transparent. And so people get anxious and don't want to engage. And so our TICTAC in particular, we serve, the EPA has broken up the country into 10 regions. We serve Region 2, which includes New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and USVI. We do have a sister TICTAC that's in Puerto Rico from the Inter-American University of Puerto Rico. It's called EAGLE, and we have an in-kind relationship. So we act historically as an environmental justice organization. We are grassroots at the best and most rooted way. We do have a federal team here, but the majority of our team actually sits in New York. And so our TICTAC primarily serves where it lives, works, and play. And I really think this is a really important thing. A colleague of mine once said this to me when I first started doing this type of work, that if you want to serve a community, you need to live, work, and play in those communities. Because if you're sitting behind the desk, you truly, whether you have the best or worst of intentions, will miss the mark. And that's okay. That type of humility is necessary. And coming out from behind the desk and going into communities is more important than anything else. And so what our TICTAC is focused on is that while we historically are a grassroots organization that serves Harlem, we do not historically serve all of New York, New Jersey, or Puerto Rico and USVI. And so what we did was we got in a car, and by we I mean myself, got in a car and visited every corner of New York and Jersey. And it took about 2.5 months. I think I spent our entire travel stipend or travel budget, but it was necessary because each community had its own needs and nuance. And I will say we have not fully understood the needs truly. Because even with, if you look at Newark has such a diverse population, has a large Brazilian community, it has a large African-American Black community, it has Mexican-American communities. None of these communities are a monolith, and none of these communities have the same needs as other communities. And so if you're not willing to go past that, while policy is very important, and it gives us the strategic opportunity to think about how the nuance, there has to be flexibility in order to create that nuance in those programs. And so what we have heard most, and we have, the way we build our think tank is we have 3 buckets of work that we focus on. One is our one-on-one support. So myself and my co-director, who's our director of operations, our director of operations, literally get on a 30-minute call with every single person who comes through our TA, just to connect with them. And she will say, because I'm on the road a lot, that it takes up most of her week, but it's necessary, because when you have a conversation with someone, when you communicate, you actually find out what the root of the issue is. And what we've found in a lot of communities, it's not that they're not smart enough, it's not that they're not pushing, it's not that they don't want to do the work, they're not confident. Am I interpreting this properly? Am I understanding this for an opportunity? Can you review it? Can you spend time with me understanding it? And that's what we do, it's that one-on-one support. The other thing I'll note is that, especially for the Latinx community, it is super important to recognize the importance of translation and speaking to people in their native language. Because I speak Arabic, and my family makes fun of me all the time because it's Makassa, which means it's broken in Arabic. And I can't express myself as much as I would like to in English. I get stuck on the words. So imagine Arabic, I learned at the same time as I learned English, but I speak mostly English in my everyday life. So if our communities and our Latinx communities are still speaking and should be speaking Spanish in their households and in their community, we have to be able also to allow them to articulate their ideas and their wants and needs in those languages. And so one thing we really pushed for, and we probably got a big save with the Puerto Rico team getting hired, was that we have to have a large translation budget. Translation is very expensive, and it is really, really important to have that access and center that access. And I'll give an example, and this was prior to working at WEAC, but it taught me something very important. I was working on an energy project that was serving the Central Valley. It's the first community solar projects in the Central Valley. How many folks have been to the Central Valley? Awesome, I love it. So some of you might be from there. So we were working with developers, and these were projects coming down from the IOU. So from PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. I was like, what? I've left so long ago. PG&E in Southern California, Edison. And these projects were huge. They were coming from the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, and they had this requirement that wherever the solar farm was, there had to be a 5-mile radius of any communities within that 5-mile radius. Their census tract were eligible automatically to receive 20% savings. Amazing, right? Where do you think these community solar projects were put? In pretty rural areas, right? And so who were they serving? Pretty small populations. Not only did they put them in areas where there wasn't going to be populations that could benefit, but they also were limited in their understanding of how to do outreach to those communities. So we were required to do the outreach and the workforce development for these projects. And we were partnered with a for-profit developer. And so the developer didn't understand their contract truly with their finance. And the finance have required that we have at least 20% of the project subscribed prior to construction. So who do you think they passed that on to? Us, as the outreach arm. They were like, oh, you're going to get your 20% of LMI communities to sign up for this so that we can start these projects construction. And I was like, bet, this is going to go great. So this was in June of 2023, and I had to have a subscription for 2 of these projects by September. We partnered because we had over 5 years of relationships with organizations and nonprofits in the Central Valley. There was a bunch of organizations there. We also had a satellite office in the Central Valley. And so we partnered with them. They were in Fresno. We had another group that was in Visalia. And I went out there with them, and we looked at the maps together to see who we could actually get to sign up. And we went out there. The things I learned from stepping from behind my desk in Oakland and going and hanging out with my team members was, 1, a lot of the places that were eligible didn't have communities. 2, my team was made up of a woman who was a little bit older, and we were doing this outreach in the dead of summer in the Central Valley. The temperature on average was like 95 degrees on concrete. The Central Valley is very warm and it's very hot in the summer, and it's actually one of the most, because of the physical nature of the Central Valley, becomes a bucket for pollution. And so it actually has some of the worst air quality in the country. We went and door knocked. Some things we learned, that most people would not open the door to our male colleagues. They didn't want a man knocking on their door in the middle of the day to sign them up. We also learned that our elderly community wanted us to help them sign up and would let us into their house, like the trust they had. We learned that we always needed a Spanish-speaking employee because I don't speak Spanish. I always had my colleague with me in case that the people required that. And so by stepping out when you're in these positions, such as yourselves, of policymaking, you have to go into the community you want to serve, because if you do not, you will create something that will not be utilized. And then the policymakers will say, oh, well, Latinx communities aren't interested. And that's not the truth. The truth is we design things that people can't take advantage of. I had another project where the community, it was a community solar, they wanted them to do 2 bills. One bill to subscribe to the solar and the other bill for their regular energy bill, even though they were gonna get a discount. And I came in the 11th hour because that's what they would do to me. And I was like, well, how does this community pay their bills? This is in New Mexico. Oh, money order. Okay, so you're telling me the only way they can pay for the subscription is online. Yeah, okay, well, do they have this translated into Spanish? No. So I was like, how is this gonna work? So it ended up that the housing authority took on all the savings and just gave the savings on their bills and could not utilize this 2-billing system. And so when we're at the Take Tap, we really try to ask our Latinx communities and all our communities, where are you at? What do you need? Build their confidence, build their opportunity, and be that bridge system to help them understand how to take advantage of these programs. So that's our technical systems. I know I was giving you the 3 and went into a tangent. The second one we do is we have created something called a community voices. And this is, we've contracted with 18 groups across New York, New Jersey, and are facilitating with them in-person training. So they serve 2 purposes. One, they amplify our work in their community. And the second is we're facilitating with them in-person trainings for their community. And majority of this actually is grants training. It's how do I understand a grant, whether it's philanthropic, whether it's federal grants, whether it's state grants. And we built ourselves to be a little bit flexible because we never built ourselves just to do federal grants. Because as a CBO, we know how cumbersome they are. And the erosion of trust that is happening now with this new administration, it was already hard enough to get the trust for folks to engage with the federal government. So I think when you think about what to do in the future is to also continue building that capacity that people don't fear the unknown. And the last thing we do is we do online trainings that are open up to the country where we ask folks to make sure that if they have any translation needs that we can provide it. But I do think it's very key in all of the work that you prioritize going into the communities that these programs are meant to serve. Because if you don't, you will create something that will not have attrition and then will be deemed unimportant and be taken away, which is even more painful than not having it at all.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and for touching on, the concept of building trust in our communities, and with this work is, I think, such a huge piece of this, so thank you. And I'd like to pivot over to Chris. Having worked at both the federal level and now at a financial institution, what do you see as the biggest gap in connecting dollars to on-and-on projects in disinvested communities, and how do we close it?
Yeah, this is a huge question. I think Sarah did an incredible job speaking to one of the big gaps that I see on the ground, and that is the lack of actually engaging community in the planning and the design and the implementation, the ongoing engagement of these projects. I remember at the Department of Energy, this was front and center because a lot of us realized and were recruited from community-based work and realized that this money wasn't going to be effective or efficiently allocated unless we changed the script and ultimately provided and empowered communities to be part of the decision-making process. The way that DOE did that was extremely innovative, and it was rolling out what's called the community benefits planning process. Every grant that came out of the Department of Energy required a portion of the application to actually describe, one, how are you advancing at the time the President's Justice 40 initiatives, right? How do we get 40% of all this money to make sure that it goes, the benefits, to those that have been historically disadvantaged, right? So how
what Justice 40 is?
high level real quick, that essentially was the definition, but it was this initiative, right, that President Biden enacted literally, I think his second or third day in office, to ensure that as we started to move forward with this administration, that we were more intentional about how the support from the federal government was going to be allocated to communities, and do so to ensure that, 40% were benefiting those that were historically disadvantaged. It was called Justice 40. And our approach to that was to say, hey, applicant, how are you going to advance that? How are you going to ensure that you're advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, critical to the success of these projects? 3, how are we ensuring good paying jobs, and not just one-time opportunities, but building careers, and to Zach's earlier point, building wealth and entrepreneurship opportunities? And lastly, a community benefits agreement. What are you actually going to do if you receive this money to ensure that what you're talking about in this application will be implemented on the ground? And that was a game-changing, approach to how to center communities in this process. And by the way, it wasn't just single digits or 5% of your merit review of your application. It was 20% of the application. It was a significant piece. If you did not do that, or you kind of half-baked it, guess what? You weren't getting funding, period. I mean, and we saw that. Great applications, but didn't do the right thing on community. They were bounced. And so that was one. The other thing we saw was the need to provide capacity, to build capacity in these communities, and through creative means, begin to support actually placing, expertise in communities. And DOE did this a couple of different ways. One, we saw Alaska, obviously a very challenging state in many, many respects. And one of the things that we implemented was called the Arctic Energy Ambassadors Program. Mm-hmm. Right now, 4-year funded position, started last August, so it's still going. And Alaska's broken out into 12 Arctic Native Regional Corporations, ARNCs. Each one of them now has an energy expert funded by the Department of Energy to support tribes and Alaska Native villages to literally go and be their consultants, to be their liaison to the federal government, to develop project pipelines, to convene stakeholders and begin approaching new opportunities for their regions. And that was a big innovation. Secondly, we saw, through Thriving Communities, in fact, DOE's contribution was what was called the Energy Communities Interagency Working Group. And it was all about, and this was also in President Biden's order that enacted Justice 40, he also created this interagency working group because he felt that, for the last 200 years, these communities have literally kept the lights on and this economy humming. And the last thing that we are going to do is make this transition and leave these people behind. That's the last thing. And that's the type of intentionality that was implemented with everything that we were doing. So this energy communities mapped out all of the places that were going to have a coal plant shut down, a coal mine shut down, an imminent transition of a fossil fuel infrastructure that at the end of the day was keeping that community thriving for generations and is about to shut down in 4, 5, 6 years. And we, as a holistic approach to the federal government and DOE led, was now placing capacity in these communities. And we partnered with AmeriCorps. We actually established a 3-year AmeriCorps program to put clean energy vistas in these communities, 4 to 5 each, so that they can start doing the ground game and the engagement with CBOs and our philanthropic community to bring, the strategic plan forward. That's another really great example. So, and the Tic Tacs, I think Sarah nailed it, and I love the kind of vision to implementation. What you guys are doing is exactly what was needed and what we were hoping to see on the ground. So that's the lack of the community planning, the design, and how I think we need to continue to center that as we move forward with these types of initiatives. And then the other flip side that I'm seeing is this lack of inclusive and accessible financing, right? Financing is hard. And often communities, because of other major barriers and struggles, have, for whatever reason, often poor credit scores. They might have, medical issues, whatever it might be. And it basically puts huge barriers in front of being able to access technologies that ultimately help improve their lives, save them money, improve their comfort, improve their indoor environmental qualities. Make them more resilient to these extreme weather events. These are all things that all of us need, especially those that are in highest energy burden, as you were saying, Alyssa, right? Why are they an energy burden? Well, there's a number of different reasons. There's split incentives. Often there are more renters than owners in these properties. Landlords are reluctant to make improvements because they're not seeing the utility bill savings, right? And so you have this split incentive. And at DOE, we were working on policy and supporting local governments and state governments to start thinking about what a minimum performance should be in your home and in your building. Because at the end of the day, that could be the driver to start to modernize and retrofit and lower the bills of these institutions, right? So you have this split incentive, which is a big one. And then it's just actually products that people can access. And so this is what I want to talk about, a really cool example with actually Climate First Bank, right? We're a traditional bank, right? We're regulated by the FDIC and the Federal Reserve. And from day one, the whole goal was to figure out how can we use this banking model to accelerate a lot of these climate and clean energy investments that we need. And why isn't Bank of America or Truist actually doing that at scale? And what we realized was that, one, the products that are out there today are not affordable. At the end of the day, they're shorter terms. And when you're buying, let's say, rooftop solar as an example, you're buying 25 years of electricity upfront, right? If you were to ask somebody, do you want to buy 25 years of power? If the utility came to you today and asked that, would you do it? Probably not. So you have to finance these things. And what you do is you basically, get the upfront financing, and over time, you're paying that off. And the idea is to save from day one. Because the terms are often too short, the monthly payment of the loan usually is higher than your utility bill. So I'm going to spend more to go clean energy. Most people can't do that. They don't have the ability to do that. So how do we drop the monthly payment? And this is where the innovation comes in around partnerships and collaboration with other financial institutions. You might have heard of CDFIs, these community development financing institutions, right? They're basically in our communities to help drive more inclusive financing, but they often lack the back-end underwriting, the capabilities of analyzing a project that's clean energy. They don't have the credit analysis or the subject matter expertise to do it. They often lack the capital to do this at scale. But that's where partnerships with banks can come in. And here in Montgomery County, in the DMV, there's a county there, right? Montgomery County, Maryland. They have a green bank. And this green bank actually taxes fossil fuel sales, gallons of gasoline that are sold in the county. And they take portions of that revenue and they fund a quasi-green bank. The whole goal of that bank is to make loans and investments that ultimately mitigate the air pollution and GHG emissions of those gallons of gasoline, right? Interesting model, one that I think should be replicated in every county in the country. But two, now they have this capital pool and they approached the bank and they said, we want to start offering solar to low and moderate income households in Montgomery County, Maryland. But we don't have a number of the things that I mentioned. Can we partner? And what they decided to do with their money is take our loan product and essentially create two things. One, a loan loss reserve, which ultimately is what's called a credit enhancement tool. It takes somebody's credit score and allows the bank to offer them a loan if it's below their current policy, right? My credit score policy at Climate First Bank is 680 credit score. If you have anything above a 680 credit score, we will finance you for sure. If you're below it, we can't finance you. And we need to find partners like CDFIs who have lower credit policies and who are willing to make that investment, right? And so that's one partnership. As we're originating loans in all across the country right now, we're finding CDFIs and we're partnering with them. We're saying, hey, we're originating these opportunities. If they don't meet my policy, I'll pass them over to you at no cost. We've already done 90% of the work. Now all you can do is finance it. And guess what? You get to keep that loan on your balance sheet and take the interest revenue every single month that you're going to be paying that loan. Who's going to be collecting that? The CDFI. Now they're building capacity, they're building a balance sheet of clean energy loans, they're building a staff, and eventually their own green lending practices, right? That's how we start to build the capacity in these communities. So I'm really excited. The loan here in Montgomery County is literally a less than 2% interest loan fixed over the lifetime of the solar. And it's a 30-year product. It's basically like a mortgage, right? In terms of its term and amortization. What that means is the payments 90% of the time are less than what they're normally paying every single month for utilities, so their cash flow from day one, and they've just fixed their utility bill, right? As we know, demand is rising, and so are utility rates. Over time, it's going to be even sweeter of a deal every single month. So that's the idea around partnerships and collaboration. We can take regulated capital from banks and we can work with CDFIs, credit unions, green banks, and we can braid our capital together. We can create products that actually do address the credit score issue and the affordability problem of saving somebody from day one and going clean energy, right? And those are the two, I think, big barriers that I'm seeing to take this thing to the next level.
So thank you so much, Chris. And yeah, I think the partnerships piece is also super important. And I think it brings a lot of people into the decision-making process. And then that in turn relates to more, community buy-in and getting people, on board with projects. So thank you for touching on that. Gretchen, I want to turn to you now. Puerto Rico's energy transition offers lessons in resilience, community organizing, and policy challenges. What should policymakers across the U.S. learn from Puerto Rico's experience in centering community needs and clean energy planning?
Great. Before I start, I forgot to tell you something. I entered government through the Presidential Management Fellow program. That's an excellent way, if you're thinking about that, to enter. It just gives you a lot of flexibility, it gives you better pay. So just think about it. I forgot to mention that. Anyways, I'm going to give you a little crash course on territorial energy policy. I'll try to do it in 5 minutes. So let's go. So Puerto Rico, I like to say, is the largest place-based Hispanic community in the U.S. I don't know if that's true, but I'm going to stick to it. I do know that because of our territorial status, we are the most politically and economically vulnerable Hispanic community in the U.S. We just are. The question here is, how do we center community needs into the clean energy planning? Well, the basic answer to that is you need to establish trust in government and trust in outsiders. And to do that, you need to engage, to listen, and to dialogue. And to do that successfully, you need to have processes that ensure citizen participation, that are transparent and clear. You need fair referees, because there's going to be differences, and you need mechanisms to review and revise the plan. So you can't just tell people to trust me. You have to actually put processes in place. And I think this is what Puerto Rico tried to do when we started on this adventure of renewable energy. And I'll be very, very quick on this, but in 2014, we passed a law in Puerto Rico that established 2 things. One was independent regulators, which we did not have, energy regulators. And 2, a requirement for an integrated resource plan, which that means is that you have to have a 20-year plan that tells you what are your energy needs, where is it coming from, how it's all going to work together. That was in 2014. In 2019, they passed another law, which basically said renewable energy goals, which would be 100% in the year 2050, okay? So all that came together, and so they started developing the integrated resource plan. And there were massive consultations involved. That's the first time, 2019, where I had contact with this particular sector, because I attended those sessions, and it was like to watch. The officials would be in a podium like we are here, and you had people both from the corporate side and from the community side and from the NGO side, talking about what they wanted to see in the IR. It has different letters in Spanish, IRP. So that was, that consultative piece was very, very important. In 2020, it got approved. And I would like to say happy ending. I'm done with my presentation, but that was not the case.
That's the beginning.
That's the beginning.
Right?
So there were challenges, and I'm going to go very quickly through challenges. Dilapidated infrastructure. I thought it was good when I was growing up, but over the years it got bad. We have 50 more service interruptions in Puerto Rico than in the U.S., and our outages are 20% longer than in the U.S. We have disenfranchisement. That means you have no pork barrel, you just have little crumbs that come here and there. We have a fiscal crisis. In 2019, that's wrong. In 2015, we defaulted. In 2016, we established the Promesa law, which brought in a fiscal board. The purpose of the fiscal board was to restructure a $74 billion debt, the largest in history, balance the budget, meaning they had complete authority over the budget, and gain access to the capital market. So basically, when we have 4 consecutive years balanced budgets, and access to the capital markets, which allows you to borrow so you can build, then the board can leave. So to get there, the board is very tight on the money. Then finally, we have, the capacity issues. How do you build capacity, lack of money to build capacity with things like the regulators. Regulators need more money so they can be better regulators and even infrastructure. And if we not have enough problems, in 2017, we had Irma and Maria. In 2020, we had the earthquakes, which a lot of people don't know about in the US, but they were massive in the South and really destroyed some towns which are still in terrible condition. But silver lining of this was it brought outside capital, which is the FEMA money. So then we have, with the HUD money and the FEMA, because we do matching grant things, around $14 billion to rebuild the grid. Now, we know that to build it back to industry standards, which is what we want and can do by law, is around $20 billion. So there is a $5 billion, shortfall that we have not sorted out. And with this incoming administration, the hopes are slim. But our fortunes changed again with the Biden administration, and it changed in many ways. First of all, there was an acknowledgement and recognition of a climate crisis and the need to do something, and territories are the front lines of the climate crisis. There was a recognition that vulnerable communities are different. They have different capacities, they have different language needs, they have different financing needs. They're just different. And then there was a recognition of the territories. For the first time, we had somebody in the White House thinking about these things. My first month, all I could think was, wow, there hasn't been somebody here in 125 years, which was the first time a territory was acquired by the US. Decisions are constantly made without any territorial representative. And that was my first month. I was like, and then I kind of got used to it. And then the final thing, and this is like all the other territories were jealous about, Puerto Rico energy issues were prioritized. And they received unprecedented attention. And when Fiona hit in 22? It even got more attention. So as they're all results of all these things, some of the things that happened for Puerto Rico was one, DOE had a Puerto Rico team, which I'm not sure it's there yet. Yeah, and they're there physically, but I'm not sure it's called that anymore. They had PR 100. PR 100 was a 2-year study that with the 6 national labs that said, okay, you want to get by 2050 to 100% renewable, let's see the pathways, and so that study also had massive community engagement, massive. The secretary went down there 9 times. It was not like picture taking, it was actual work, and people were very, very satisfied. In addition to that, just to run really quickly, there was extra funding. There was something called the Resiliency Fund by DOE, which was $1 billion. Thanks to Grijalva and the Biden administration, we got, bless him, he's in heaven. We got $1 billion for renewable. That is for residential, vulnerable communities, vulnerable health facilities. We had $113 million for rural energy for America, which is for ag producers, for renewable installations and so forth. That's through USDA, the rural program. That was a great program, and now that they're doing other bad stuff there. $147 million for the Greenhouse Reduction Fund from EPA. This went for credit unions in Puerto Rico, which are cooperativas. And so that $147 million is so credit unions can finance, commercial and residential renewable at the cooperativa plan, because Puerto Rico has a massive cooperativa system. Solar for all, 156 million EPA households, that's household disadvantage, and then 2.08 billion in loan guarantees and loans. Some of this is in court, some of this is semi-frozen, some of it they're resubmitting application. I'm not going to go into details. So this is a very fluid situation, but this is a massive amount of money that is that made, that just was life-changing. Now, so the expectations were very high, the delivery was very slow. And again, we continue to have these outages, which have enormous impact at all levels. And we're talking, if you're a poor population, we have 40% poverty line. When your food is damaged or when your appliance is damaged because of an outage, it's a huge thing, okay? You have elderly population, huge thing. They're very, susceptible to heat, people with disabilities, people with health issues, the same thing. You have these outages, it's very highly problematic. And just economic development. It is hard to run a business if your power goes in and out, and it's hard to attract business, especially manufacturing. If your power is in and out, right now, we can't possibly dream of anything in the CHIPS Act, because of our power situation. This uncertainty, and lack of resources that we're kind of faces creates a tension. And the tension is between people and communities. And then now we're talking all sorts of peoples and communities, not just vulnerable ones who want, they want accessible, affordable, reliable power, okay? That's all they want. And so people with money or some type of money can avail themselves to solar panels, but the vulnerable populations cannot. But that's where everybody wants to head. And then you have the government, which wants to do the same thing, the Puerto Rico government, but they want reliability above all. And the Puerto Rico government and also private interests think that natural gas is the way. Now, I think there has to be a balance. It is true that you can't go full on renewable, and for utility scale is a little bit challenging, but the way current policy is moving seems to be leaning heavy on gas, okay? And I'll try to explain this simply, but just to give you an understanding of how you can have these policies that the country wants to go in one direction, but the government is leaning in the other. In Puerto Rico, energy utilities were privatized. So you have a utility for generation and a utility for distribution and transmission, okay? The utility for generation, which is called Genera, is owned by a supplier of natural gas, New Fortress, okay? There's a new plant that is going to be constructed with local people. It's an LNG plant of gas. It will be supplied also by New Fortress. That LNG plant is supposed to transition eventually to hydrogen, green hydrogen, but there's no money or timelines for that transition. So you got this plan that is kind of out there. Right now, as we speak, San Juan is here and Ponce is here. It's like a rectangle south. The head of the Ponce Port Authority authorized a ship-to-ship gas transshipment for New Fortress in the port of Ponce. It's currently, people are up in arms about it because the director of the Port Authority did the $3 million deal without consulting with the board or the mayor. And I got a call yesterday from the communities in Ponce that they want to talk to me. I'm no longer in the White House, so I'm not sure how this is going to fly. But anyway, they want to talk to me because they're up in arms because that fuel facility is near a university, it's near a residential areas, it's near a mall and so forth. And they're very concerned about the safety. So you see how it's kind of moving in that direction. And so people, and I think this is a way of saying you can have great laws and great processes, but you need to have, the follow through, because when there's little resources, there's these tensions. And then the last tension in this picture is the board. The board has to restructure a debt. On the 74 billion, only 9 billion are left to restructure. And that is of the power utility, actually, the old government power utility. And so I think the board is in this situation where if too many people go solar, the customer base for the power utility is going to be very small and the prices could go high. At the same time, how do you negotiate that balance and how you do? So it's actually very, very, very complicated. And that's where we're now. So what is our, what can we hope for? And this is, I guess, the last message I want to leave here, the philanthropic sector. right now, we don't have an administration that cares about the things that, about renewable energy or vulnerable communities. I forgot to mention, the Trump administration held up the money for the grid. That money was appropriated in 2018. And they released it on September, it was 9.6 and they billion, and they released it on September 2020, a month and a half before the election. And so people always say, why is it taking so long? Because they did not release the money. And then the remainder of the money was released when the Biden administration came in. So I'm not hopeful, okay, I'm sorry. And so what do we look at? I'm looking at the philanthropic sector. I'm looking at people outside of government, and the philanthropic sector, played a role in the IRP. They were there, with analysis and expertise and capacity. The philanthropic sector, when I'm talking philanthropic sector, I'm not talking Puerto Rico, I'm talking national US-based sector. They played a role in Maria massively, for the first time, Oxfam, which only does international, for the first time stepped in Puerto Rico and started to do Puerto Rico's situation was so dire. But now that these crises are over, they're stepping back out. And now, the world's on fire. So they're all over the place and their funding's being cut. So it's very, very difficult. But just so you have an idea, in 2021, the philanthropic sector spent $103 billion in the United States and only $60 million in the territories. For every $310 that you spend on a US based person, they spend $16 on a territory person. They don't think about the territories. So it is my hope that I'm telling you all this, that when you go to your jobs and I like to evangelize, I guess, about the territories, you take these ideas with you. It is my hope that as we move into these next 4 years, which are just a very, very difficult situation, the territories are not forgotten by the philanthropic sector in terms of expertise, in terms of capacity building, in terms of oversight, and saying, hey, you cannot do ship to ship on Ponce, under these conditions. There's a community, there's this, there's that. You haven't talked to FERC, you haven't talked to anybody. Crazy. And lastly, I just want to give a shout out because I just feel grateful to not all, but some of the people that have been so involved in the philanthropic sector at the national level, not the Puerto Rico, because we have local philanthropy, Institute for Energy, Economic, and Financial Analysis, Earth Justice, Sierra Club, El Puente, Latino Justice, and Hispanic Federation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. We have a lot, we brought up a lot.
I hope for this 5 minutes.
No. No, that's all right. So yeah, now we'll transition to audience Q&A. If you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand and we'll pass the mic over to you. Let's start over here on the left.
Hi.
Hello, sorry.
Hi, my name is Sophia. I'm also from Texas. So it's kind of a question more than towards you. You talked about how when you came to the Senate that you realized that it was less of, you couldn't get away with just tons of facts. You had to convince them further, you had to get them on board with your ideas. And so I wanted to ask about, in Texas, with it being both such a leader in fossil fuels and in renewable energy, the political climate towards renewable energy, especially coming from state leaders, is very hostile. So how would you see the future of changing that conversation to be able to allow for more cleaner energy sources to be developed in Texas?
Yeah, Sophia, that's a great point, right? Texas is the leader in fossil fuels, but also in wind and solar, and pretty close in batteries. And in fact, I think it's like SB 355, and the Texas government is trying to change how much the cost of renewables is going so they can increase fossil fuel development. I would say most people vote with their pocketbooks, right? And so going to, Texans love being, they're a little egocentric, right? They love being the first and the best and the right. And so you have to remind them, continue leading in renewable energy because it's lowering your bill. That's hard stop. I would start there and give them tools and information to show that. But like for any community, and I think we also just find what like drives them. I think for most Texans, it's the cost, but also it's like, you're number one in the country of leading this. Like Texans love to lead, push that narrative and say, hey, let's continue leading. Let's not, falter by promoting fossil fuels. Fossil fuels is a very large part. So, and a huge economic and workforce driver in the state. So it's not that we're taking away from that. But I'm sure people up here can tell you, like, the amount of workforce and economy that's focused in on renewables is a larger multiplier than fossil fuel energy that's already developed in that region. So that might be a little way.
Yeah, just wanted to double tap on the price point. I mean, at the end of the day, energy is about price. And we're not selling snake oil here when we're saying that the cheaper, better, faster solutions happen to be carbon-free, right? 96% of new power and energy that was developed last year was carbon-free. 66% of that was solar, 67% of that was solar. When you added batteries, it got it up to like close to 85%. When you added nuclear and a couple of the other carbon-free sources, it got us to 96%. This year's projection, 96% carbon-free, right? At the end of the day, 400,000 jobs were created in a 2-year period since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, 2.5 years. 400,000 new clean energy net jobs. In the USER report, which is the U.S. Energy and Environmental Report for Employment, it showed that Hispanics actually, and I think Zach mentioned this earlier, was the highest demographic that was entering the clean energy workforce.
Just
That
because
was
of
amazing.
origins.
Well,
Because of origins.
that's one big part of it. There's no doubt about it. The amount of renewables and PR is unbelievable what's happening. So I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of, I think, rhetoric and narrative that's going out there and policy that certainly is going to try to do everything to claw back that progress, but the ship has sailed, I think, is the narrative. There's nothing clawing this transition to cleaner sources of energy. And it's because it's being driven by price, the cheaper, better, faster solutions, and those will win.
Thank you. Is there another question? We'll go to the back, or Louise is fine, actually. Then we'll get to you, Governor.
You guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Louise, I'm not from Texas. So my question is for everybody here. How can Congress, state, or local government preserve the programs that are already there that make clean energy more accessible to low-income communities?
Please.
I didn't hear it, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Congress do what?
What can Congress do to make sure that we are investing in clean energy
Okay.
at the state and local level?
and preserving. I think it's talking across the aisle. I know it sounds really lame and really, kind of obvious even maybe.
I cannot not
But
vote.
it's really, really important because I think what people tend, and we really hold this, is like, I don't just serve like New York City. I serve rural parts of New York and New Jersey. I spent most of my time visiting rural communities. That this isn't just the blue issue, that this is a red, purple, and all the colors in between. And like really talking, and I'm the farthest person from a policy person. I kind of cringe when I walk into these spaces. But I have to get over that and recognize that it is important to have those conversations, to talk to your colleagues who might not think you have anything in common, because these programs are meant to serve everyone. Environmental justice is not a black and brown only issue. Yes, structurally, it is something that affects our communities more than any other community, but it is a white community issue. It is an issue for all people. And so I think really pushing, doubling down on those conversations and not siloing ourselves. And for you folks who are very happily in these spaces, continuing to like push outside of your comfort zone, because the articulation of like some of these executive orders that have come down are so, what's the word I'm looking for? Like fundamentally limited and meant to be dumbed down to really think of EJ and energy equity as like this only for these communities and just for some, which is not the case. And so it's breaking down those presumptions and narratives. That would be my take. I mean, as much as I would love to just like be hanging out with my people, I do know that it's really important to push outside of our understandings and talk to other people in Congress.
Well, and can I get a show of hands of what's the representation of Republican staffers in this room?
Yeah.
All right,
There we go.
let's change that,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm. And actually, I was just in this conversation on Friday with a group, and it was about the emergence of what they're calling the eco-right. There's actually a number of organizations that have tried to, find that common ground. And I think that one of the things that we need to be doing is building the alliances with those organizations, things like the American Conservation Coalition, this new organization, Nature is Nonpartisan, right? Benji Becker, if you've been following some of that. There's an organization that's funding a lot of those eco-right groups called Deploy US here out of the Capitol in the DC Metro. I agree 100% that if we're going to change the narrative and continue the momentum, we need to be actively working across the aisle, finding common ground. The narrative around energy dominance works for clean energy. It is the most dominant energy source. It is the faster, cheaper, better technologies. It is American made, and we want to focus in on that. Those are all things that we need to embrace with that new narrative. It is also about energy abundance. And we know that we have a huge growth of demand, 2 to 5% annually between now and 2030, because of a bunch of the stuff that is going on. And that's going to require us to think differently about less scarcity, more abundance, and about all sources. And if we're talking about all sources on the even playing field, the carbon-free ones are going to win the day because of the price point, because of a number of the other things, right? They're American-made, they're locally job creating, et cetera.
And they're
So-
safe.
And they're safe.
They're safe. Working in a coal mine, having a refinery near your home is not safe. So,
Absolutely. I think we can get to John Fellow really, really quickly. Or
Yeah, I'll go really fast. Thank you all for being here. I used to be at Justice Clean Energy Shop, so you talk about Biden programs, this is really fun. My quick question is that how do we create market certainty for all these programs that are being tampered with at the moment to show that clean energy is viable for people to invest in and people to be a part of it?
I can just quickly mention, that's why I'm excited to be in this new role in the private sector. I actually think private sector is going to be a big piece of continuing the momentum. And although they may want to be very vocal about that, their shareholders, their businesses are still maintaining a lot of their commitments. And I think we need to hold them to that, continue it. Philanthropic partners are going to be absolutely essential as well. When I was in Orlando during the first Trump administration, an emergence of local government support and coalitions was built. The Climate Mayors movement was launched. You had USDN and others. And when we had the alignment of the stars, all of a sudden that capacity was mobilized. And I think what we're about to see is that same approach of state, local focus, philanthropic support, and the private sector stepping in with creative products and services to continue that momentum. And Climate First Bank is one of many that are out there trying to ensure that we continue that.
we can just, we're going to pivot now to just close your remarks. If we can make it like 30 seconds for each of you, just one takeaway if possible, that we can all take home with us today. And Gretchen, can I start with you?
We talked
Okay, go.
Just make it quick. Just seeing how can we get Congress to change. I've done a lot of diaspora organizing. There are Hispanics in every state. And so, there's something called Green Latinos, which is national, but, organize at the state level, at the local level, at the Latino level, and find allies and definitely work across the lines. And that's how we would get things done, try to identify where are we. And then you talk to the senators and the congressmen, regardless whether Republican or Democrat, those are the people who are supposed to represent you.
Doubling down on continuing to involve our local governments, getting engaged at the community level, and explore ways in which, new partnerships, like I was talking about before, could unlock new types of solutions for the communities that we care about. And so, follow along. I look forward to connecting with all of you.
I would say from a CBO point of view, and something I've always practiced is we all carry a bit of privilege and power, whether we recognize it or not, and don't be afraid of questioning the systems that we live in and being a disruptor of them and being innovative and creative. I would say, like, when we were looking at how we were going to reach out in New York, New Jersey, I was looking for any loophole that I could exploit in a positive way to actually be able to fund CBOs that didn't have UEI numbers, for example, or couldn't afford but could do the work. And so I think you all have a position being in this space where you can be a disruptor. You have some privilege, you have some power, and don't underestimate the creativity or question the systems that tell you this is how it's done. Because chances are the reason it's done that way is probably engineering out equity. So consider how to bring it back in.
Yeah, I love that. I would say, in that same vein, stay hungry, right? Like, keep that hustle up that you came in here to make a change and do it. Be the future you want to be, right? So if you want a clean energy future, if you want equity in energy programs, do that. And then make friends with people on the other side of the aisle, please, so that we can all, like, I go back home and my friends aren't all Democrats, right? I hope that y'all find friends, because it's important to have a diverse perspective when we tackle these problems, and we can't come at it from one side.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much, Chair. Now let's give a round of applause. Just to close out, as we heard today, we have a lot of work to do. It takes designing programs that are reaching renters and low-income families, and we have to be investing in the training programs and the partnerships, the hiring pipelines that make the energy careers accessible, and making sure that dollars are actually showing up in our neighborhoods, in our schools, and in our jobs. So thank you so much for being patient with us today, and thank you. I think together we can truly bridge the gap between in the clean energy space and doing something better for all of us. So thank you so much.